If you think your heart risk begins with cholesterol, diet, or exercise, you may be overlooking the most dangerous moment of your entire day. Because for many adults over 60, the real threat does not start in the gym or at the dinner table. It begins silently in the first few seconds after waking up, when the body is still shifting from sleep to alertness. And according to growing clinical evidence, what you do in that short window may raise your risk of a serious cardiac event far more than most people realize. Poor sleep alone does not usually cause sudden death, but the way you transition from sleep to wakefulness can place extreme stress on your cardiovascular system. One specific morning behavior, something millions of people do without thinking, has been linked in research to a sharp increase in early day cardiac risk. It is not smoking. It is not heavy food. It is something far more ordinary, something that happens before your feet even touch the ground. And the most concerning part is that most people have never been warned about it, not in routine checkups, not in cardiology visits, and not in general health advice. Yet evidence suggests it may raise the risk of a fatal heart event by a significant margin in older adults, especially those over 60 whose cardiovascular systems are already more sensitive to sudden changes. The good news is that the same research also points to a very simple protective routine, something so basic it costs nothing, yet has been shown to reduce early morning cardiac incidence by more than half in some studies involving older populations. The issue is not that people cannot do it, it is that almost no one has been taught how important it is or how precisely it must be done. I am Dr. William Lee, a physician specializing in senior health. And over the past 15 years, I have worked with thousands of patients who believed they were doing everything right. They were eating reasonably well, taking their medications consistently, staying moderately active, and following general medical advice. Yet many of them still ended up in my clinic after unexpected cardiac symptoms or near emergency events. When I started reviewing their daily routines in detail, a pattern became impossible to ignore. It was not just long-term lifestyle choices that mattered. It was the way their mornings unfolded. In particular, the first half minute after waking often contained small actions that, when repeated daily, quietly added up to significant cardiovascular strain. What I am about to explain is not widely emphasized in standard heart health discussions, but the physiological evidence is clear. In the early morning hours, typically between around 4 a.m. and midday, the human body goes through a predictable but intense internal shift. Blood pressure naturally rises, heart rate increases, blood becomes slightly thicker and more prone to clot formation. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline surge as the body prepares for activity. This pattern is known as the morning cardiovascular surge. It is not a disease. It is a normal biological process designed to help you wake up and function. In younger adults, it is usually handled without difficulty. But in older adults, especially those over 60, the same surge places far more strain on the system. As we age, blood vessels lose some of their flexibility. The nervous system reacts more slowly, and the blood itself has a slightly higher tendency to clot. This means the same natural morning shift that once felt harmless can become a vulnerable period where the heart is under extra pressure. In fact, medical data shows that heart attacks and strokes are most likely to occur between early morning and late morning hours. Not because of breakfast itself, not because of medication timing, but because of how the body transitions from rest to activity. That transition is where risk quietly builds. And yet, despite decades of research, most people are never taught how to manage that transition safely. Doctors often focus on cholesterol levels, blood pressure numbers, or diet plans, but rarely on what happens in the first minutes after waking. That gap in awareness is exactly where preventable risk builds up. Now, before we go further, I want you to reflect on your own routine. When you open your eyes in the morning, what is the very first thing you usually do? Do you immediately reach for your phone? Do you sit up quickly and get out of bed without pause? Or do you take a moment to settle before moving? There is no judgment here, only awareness, because understanding your current habit is the first step toward changing the outcome. Let's begin with the most common mistake of all, one that seems completely harmless on the surface but creates a measurable impact on cardiovascular stress. The first dangerous habit is checking your phone immediately after waking, often within the first 1 or 2 minutes. For many people, this is automatic. The phone is beside the bed, and before the body is fully awake, the mind is already being pulled into messages, notifications, news, and information. At first glance, this does not seem like a heart-related issue, but physiologically, it creates a chain reaction. When you wake up, your cortisol levels are already elevated due to the natural morning surge. Your nervous system is in a sensitive, transitional state. Introducing fast-moving information at that exact moment pushes the brain into heightened alert mode before the cardiovascular system has stabilized. Research published in Aging and Neuroscience journals has shown that immediate cognitive stimulation after waking can significantly raise blood pressure in older adults, and that this elevation can last for nearly an hour in some cases. That means nearly the entire first part of your morning is spent in a higher stress cardiovascular state without you realizing it. And it does not even require stressful content. Even neutral or positive information can trigger this response when the brain is still transitioning from sleep. The issue is timing, not content. The system is simply not ready yet. Over time, this repeated early spike in blood pressure can add unnecessary strain to already aging blood vessels. For someone in their 60s or 70s, that added stress every morning becomes more significant than most people assume. The solution is surprisingly simple. Create a short buffer between waking and screen exposure. Even 2 minutes without your phone allows your cardiovascular system to stabilize before external stimulation begins. That small delay alone can significantly reduce early morning pressure spikes. But this is only the beginning, because what you do immediately after waking does not stop with your phone. Another habit, even more physically impactful, happens right after. Most people also begin their day by drinking coffee before anything else, often without taking any water first. It feels normal, even comforting, but from a physiological standpoint, the timing can create a hidden strain on the body, especially in older adults who already wake up slightly dehydrated. The second major mistake happens almost automatically in millions of households every morning, often within minutes of getting out of bed. It feels harmless, even comforting, but inside the body, it creates a condition that can quietly increase strain on the heart. It is drinking coffee before drinking any water. For many people, coffee is the true start of the day. It is the first signal to the brain that the day has begun, the first source of energy, the first ritual of routine. But from a cardiovascular perspective, especially in adults over 60, the timing of that first cup matters far more than most people realize. Here is what your body is dealing with the moment you wake up. During sleep, you lose water continuously through breathing and normal metabolic activity over 7 to 8 hours. This loss can equal roughly half a liter of fluid or more. You wake up not just slightly thirsty, but in a mild state of dehydration that directly affects blood thickness and circulation. At the same time, your blood is already in its morning state, meaning it is naturally more concentrated and slightly more prone to clotting. This is part of the normal morning cardiovascular surge we discussed earlier. Your body is essentially in a condition where blood flow is already under more pressure than later in the day. Now, if the first thing you introduce into this system is caffeine, the effect becomes more complex. Caffeine itself is not inherently dangerous for most people, but it does have a mild diuretic effect, which means it encourages the body to lose additional fluid. On a fully hydrated system, this is usually not a problem, but on a dehydrated morning system, it can temporarily worsen fluid balance. The result is subtle, but important. Blood can become slightly more viscous or thicker, which makes it harder for the heart to pump efficiently. When blood is thicker, circulation requires more effort, and the heart is forced to work under higher resistance at a time when it is already adjusting to the stress of waking. Clinical research has observed this effect. Studies on older adults show that drinking coffee before water consumption can lead to measurable increases in blood viscosity for a period after waking compared to those who hydrate first. This does not mean coffee is harmful by itself. It means the order in which you consume it changes how your cardiovascular system responds in those critical early minutes This distinction is important because the goal is not to eliminate coffee. It is to reduce unnecessary stress on a system that is already working harder in the morning due to age-related changes. The fix is extremely simple, yet it is one of the most effective adjustments you can make. Before your first cup of coffee, drink a full glass of water. Room temperature is best, and the amount does not need to be excessive. Even a single glass is enough to begin restoring fluid balance and reducing blood thickness. This small action helps rehydrate the body before caffeine is introduced. It supports smoother circulation, reduces strain on blood vessels, and allows the cardiovascular system to transition more safely from the overnight state into the active daytime state. What makes this habit so powerful is not complexity, but timing. It takes less than a minute, requires no medication, and costs nothing. Yet its effect on early morning circulation can be meaningful when practiced consistently over time. After hydration comes another issue that most people underestimate entirely: how quickly they move their body immediately after waking. Many individuals go from lying down straight to standing up in a single motion. No pause, no transition, no adjustment period. It feels natural because it has been repeated for years, sometimes decades. But for the cardiovascular system, especially in older adults, this sudden change in posture can create a rapid drop in blood pressure. This condition is known as orthostatic hypotension. It happens when blood pressure temporarily falls as you move from lying or sitting to standing. In younger people, the body corrects this almost instantly. But as we age, the compensatory mechanisms slow down. When the adjustment is delayed, the brain may briefly receive less blood flow. This can cause dizziness, lightheadedness, or a momentary feeling of imbalance. In mild cases, it passes quickly. But in more serious cases, it can lead to falls, fainting, or sudden cardiac strain as the heart attempts to compensate by rapidly increasing its workload. Research has linked frequent morning episodes of orthostatic hypotension in older adults with a significantly higher long-term risk of cardiovascular events. This is not because standing up is dangerous in itself, but because doing it too quickly, repeatedly, places stress on a system that is already in a sensitive morning state. The key issue is speed, not movement. Your body is designed to change positions. What it struggles with is abrupt transition without adjustment time. One of my patients, a retired school teacher in her early 70s, experienced this firsthand. She would wake up and immediately sit up, swing her legs over the bed, and stand in one continuous motion. One morning, she nearly fainted while reaching for her nightstand. It was not caused by dehydration or a major medical condition. It was simply the result of her cardiovascular system not having enough time to adapt to the change in position. When we adjusted her routine, we did not introduce medication or complicated interventions. We simply slowed down the transition. First, she began by lying still for about half a minute after waking. This allowed her body to recognize the shift from sleep to alertness. Then she moved slowly into a seated position and waited again for a short pause, letting circulation stabilize. Only after that did she stand up gradually, with intention rather than urgency. Within weeks, the dizziness episodes stopped completely. More importantly, she felt more stable and confident every morning without the constant fear of sudden imbalance. This is the core principle behind nearly every safe morning habit, allowing the body time to transition instead of forcing it to adjust instantly. Now, beyond physical movement and hydration, there is another layer that quietly affects cardiovascular strain in the morning, and it is often completely invisible to most people. It is the mental and emotional state you enter immediately upon waking. Because even before your feet touch the floor, your mind may already be triggering a stress response that directly impacts your heart. Most people assume heart health is only physical: blood pressure, cholesterol, exercise, diet. But in reality, the cardiovascular system is deeply connected to the brain, and what you think and feel in the first moments after waking can place just as much strain on your heart as physical movement. This is one of the most overlooked risks in morning health. When you open your eyes, your mind does not wake up slowly. It often jumps immediately into activity. Thoughts about yesterday begin to appear. Plans for today start forming. Worries about work, family, finances, or health surface almost instantly. And for many people, this mental activity begins before they have even fully sat up in bed. What this creates inside the body is a hidden stress reaction. The brain does not distinguish between real physical danger and emotional stress. When you start thinking about problems or pressure, your body responds as if it needs to prepare for action. That means the release of stress hormones like cortisol continues to rise, even on top of the already elevated morning cortisol surge. This double activation is important because cortisol is not just a stress hormone in a vague sense. It has direct physical effects on the cardiovascular system. It increases heart rate, raises blood pressure, and contributes to arterial stiffness when elevated repeatedly over time. In younger individuals, the body can usually handle this morning rise without major consequences. But in older adults, especially those over 60, the cardiovascular system is already operating with reduced flexibility and slower recovery responses. That means every additional spike in stress response has a greater impact. Research has shown a strong link between high emotional stress upon waking and increased risk of cardiovascular events. In large, long-term studies, individuals who consistently reported waking up with anxiety, worry, or mental pressure had significantly higher rates of heart-related complications compared to those who began their day in a calmer state. The key point is not that stress is avoidable. Life will always bring challenges. The issue is timing. When stress begins in the very first seconds of the morning, before the body has stabilized from sleep, it creates a compounding effect that increases cardiovascular load during an already vulnerable period. This is why the first few minutes of the day matter so much more than most people realize. The body is not yet fully regulated. Blood pressure is still adjusting. Hormones are still stabilizing. And the nervous system is in a transition phase between rest and alertness. If, during this transition, the mind immediately engages in worry or mental pressure, the cardiovascular system is forced to respond under unstable conditions. Over time, this repeated pattern can contribute to chronic elevation in morning blood pressure variability. And variability itself is a risk factor, not just absolute numbers. Sudden spikes and fluctuations place more strain on blood vessels than steady, controlled levels. The solution is not to ignore your thoughts or pretend stress does not exist. That would be unrealistic. The solution is to create a buffer between waking and mental engagement. Even a short pause of 1 to 3 minutes can significantly change how the body responds. During this time, the goal is not productivity, it is stabilization. Simple breathing techniques can help shift the nervous system away from a stress-dominant state. One effective pattern involves slow, controlled breathing. Inhale gently for a few seconds, hold briefly, and exhale longer than you inhale. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for calming the heart rate and lowering blood pressure. Physiologically, this is not relaxation in a vague sense. It is a measurable shift in autonomic balance. Studies have shown that controlled breathing practices in the morning can reduce systolic blood pressure by several points within minutes in older adults. That may sound small, but even modest reductions in early morning pressure can significantly lower strain during the highest risk period of the day. I once worked with a patient named Linda, a retired nurse in her 70s, who experienced frequent morning palpitations. Her medical tests were normal, her heart structure was stable, but her symptoms consistently appeared within the first hour of waking. When we reviewed her routine, a clear pattern emerged. She would wake up and immediately begin mentally reviewing everything she needed to do. Her daughter's health concerns, bills that needed attention, appointments she was worried about, all of this began before she had even fully gotten out of bed. Her body was essentially waking up into a state of emotional urgency every single morning. That emotional urgency was translating into physical stress on the heart. We introduced a simple change. Before checking anything, before thinking through the day, she would stay still in bed for 2 minutes and focus only on slow breathing. Nothing else. No problem solving, no planning, just breathing. 3 weeks later, she reported something she did not expect. The palpitations had stopped, not reduced slightly, but disappeared entirely. More importantly, she said she felt less rushed by life in the mornings, even though nothing about her external circumstances had changed. This illustrates a powerful truth. The heart does not only respond to physical actions, it responds to emotional timing. If the morning begins in a state of calm, the cardiovascular system transitions more smoothly. If it begins in a state of urgency or worry, the system enters the day under unnecessary strain. And yet, even with all of these factors combined, hydration, movement, emotional control, there is still another behavior that significantly increases morning cardiovascular risk, especially in older adults. It is something many people consider healthy, even beneficial, but the timing and intensity make all the difference. It is morning exercise. And in the next section, we will look at why even exercise, when done incorrectly in the early morning, can become a hidden trigger for cardiac stress. Exercise is widely considered one of the best things you can do for your heart, and in most cases, that is absolutely true. Regular physical activity improves circulation, strengthens the heart muscle, supports healthy blood pressure, and reduces long-term cardiovascular risk. But there is an important detail that is rarely discussed with enough clarity, especially for adults over 60. The benefit of exercise depends not only on what you do, but also on when and how you do it. Because in the early morning hours, your body is not starting from a neutral state. It is starting from a biologically intense one. As we have already seen, the morning cardiovascular surge naturally raises blood pressure, increases heart rate, thickens the blood slightly, and elevates stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. This is a normal transition from sleep to wakefulness, but it also means your heart is already working harder in the first hours of the day. Now, imagine adding intense exercise on top of that state immediately after waking. Running, heavy lifting, high-intensity intervals, or any sudden strenuous activity in those first morning hours can push the cardiovascular system into a zone of excessive demand. The heart is not only adjusting to the stress of waking, but now it is also being forced to meet the sudden oxygen and circulation demands of exercise. For younger individuals, this combination is usually manageable, but for older adults, especially those over 60, the margin for safety is smaller. Blood vessels are less flexible, recovery responses are slower, and the heart has less ability to rapidly adapt to sudden spikes in workload. This is why research has found a measurable increase in cardiac events during vigorous exercise performed in the early morning window, particularly between roughly 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. during the natural cardiovascular surge period. The issue is not exercise itself. It is the timing combined with intensity. In simple terms, it is not the movement that creates risk, but the overload placed on a system that has not yet fully stabilized. When you wake up, your body is still in transition, blood pressure is shifting, hormones are adjusting, circulation is redistributing. If you immediately demand maximum physical output, you are forcing a system that is still calibrating to operate at peak performance. That is where problems can occur. This does not mean morning exercise is dangerous or should be avoided. In fact, completely avoiding morning movement would remove a major health benefit. The key is adjusting the intensity and allowing a gradual ramp up instead of an abrupt start. Gentle movement in the morning is not only safe, it is highly beneficial. Activities like slow walking, light stretching, or gentle mobility work help the cardiovascular system transition more smoothly from rest to activity. They support circulation without overwhelming the heart. Think of it as warming up the system rather than pushing it to its limits immediately. One of my patients, a 8-year-old retired firefighter named James, learned this the hard way. He had spent years running early in the morning as part of his routine. He was disciplined, consistent, and proud of his fitness level. But over time, he began noticing chest tightness during his runs shortly after waking. When he came in for evaluation, his heart structure was stable, and his general health markers were not alarming. The issue was not damage already done, it was a strain of timing. He was starting his runs at a point in the day when his cardiovascular system was least prepared for high-intensity output. His body was still in the natural morning surge, and instead of easing into activity, He was immediately pushing into full exertion. We adjusted his routine. Instead of running first thing in the morning, he began with 10 to 15 minutes of walking and gentle stretching. His actual run was moved to later in the day when his body was fully warmed up and stabilized. The results were clear. Within weeks, the chest tightness disappeared, his endurance improved, his resting heart rate even decreased slightly. Most importantly, he felt more stable and controlled during exercise. What changed was not his fitness level, it was the timing of stress on the cardiovascular system. This is a critical concept that many people miss. The heart does not simply respond to effort, it responds to effort in context. The same physical activity can feel completely different to the cardiovascular system depending on whether it is performed during a vulnerable transition period or a stable one. Now, while physical strain is one side of the morning equation, there is another factor that is often even more powerful and far less visible. It is not about movement, it is about emotion. Because even if your body is calm, your mind can quietly push your cardiovascular system into a stress state before the day has even begun. And that is where we continue next